Today on The State of Us, prescribing a plethora of psychiatric drugs to American teens. Welcome to The State of Us. I'm your host, Justin T. Weller, joined, of course, today by the one and only, your friendly redneck liberal and the senior resident historian here at True Chat, Mr. Lance Jackson. Today, we're looking at a New York Times piece, an investigation into prescribing large amounts of psychiatric drugs to American teens. Why is this happening? We're going to talk about the multiple medicines, technology, how it affects ADHD, if it makes it worse, lack of mental health professionals available, and then who's making these prescriptions, who is overseeing them, relying completely on medication versus therapy and medication, a lack of studies for conclusive use in young people. So there's a lot to dive into. And of course, finally, we'll end with what can you do? If there's a young person in your life who's struggling with some sort of mental health challenge, then what can you do, or what should they be doing? Should they be taking these medications? Should they be getting therapy? And if they can't get into therapy, what can you do? Lots to talk about, Lance, but before we dive in, what's our word of the day?
Well, the word of the day is petulant. P-E-T-U-L-A-N-T. 3 syllables, petulant. It's an adjective. Means impatient or irritable, especially over a petty annoyance. Peevish. And I'm trying not to be petulant today. So I'm just let everybody know.
How's that going?
Well, not too good, because technology's not working today, and I'm just not feeling it, So I'm going to try to fight back being petty and irritable today and impatient.
So you're going to work on not being petulant.
Yes, but okay. I'm not starting out very well.
Anti-petulance.
So you just have to listen to the show and see if I get in a better mood, or if I stay petulant the entire time, and then see what Bradley leaves in, if he leaves all my petulant remarks in, or if he cuts them out to make me sound like a nicer person.
Really, really going for it here at the beginning. A study published in 2020 in the journal
Hit that grand slam early and you just quit.
Pediatrics found that 40% of people ages 2 to 24 who were prescribed a drug for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD, were also prescribed at least one other medication for depression, anxiety, another mood or behavioral disorder. The study found that more than 50 different psychotropic medicines prescribed in such combinations, and a review by the New York Times discovered that roughly half of the drugs were not approved for use in adolescents, although doctors have discretion to prescribe as they see fit.
Well, this drug's not working, so we'll do this drug, and then we'll try this one, and then these 3 drugs are making you act like this, so we'll give you another drug, and hey, before too long, you don't even know what you're taking, but I don't know why you're not feeling any better. Really? Really? That's modern psychiatric care? So
if you're in that age range and you received one of those drugs, 40% of the people that were prescribed a drug like, say, Adderall, right, for ADHD, were also prescribed at least one other psychotropic drug. And the kicker, because that sounds like a lot as it is, but the real kicker is that last phrase right there, which is the New York Times further examined the information and discovered that of those, 40% who are getting the additional drugs, 50% of the drugs being given to them are not approved for use in adolescents.
Why are we doing this? Tell me why this is the next part of the story. You're going to tell me why doctors are doing this?
Well, I have to make you a little more petulant before we get to that.
I'm not sure that's possible, but go ahead.
Express Scripts, a mail order pharmacy,
I'm familiar with them,
recently reported that prescriptions of antidepressants for teenagers rose 38% from 2015 to 2019, compared with 12% for adults. Prozac and Lexapro are the only medicines that are approved for teenagers with depression, according to the FDA. while antidepressants in general carry a black box warning about increased risk of suicide for adolescents.
You know, two things here. First of all, your years were 15 to 19. So that's pre-pandemic. And all we're hearing about, and anecdotally what I'm hearing about from my teacher friends, is that the mental state of children is worse today than it was before the pandemic. But you're telling us before the pandemic, prescriptions were up almost 40%. So we're going to give you medicine to help your anxiety or to help your ADHD that might cause adolescents to commit suicide. I mean, how many red flags do doctors need? How many red flags do parents need? My gosh, this probably isn't the way to go. It could help, or it might cause them to want to kill themselves. And that's one of the, and I'm not being facetious, and I'm not making fun of it, because folks, I've dealt with teenage suicide. Okay. I've lost students this way, and it's horrible for the family, for their friends, because it's and we as a society lose young people. And so I'm not making fun of it at all. This is a major problem in our society today. And at some point, and maybe we're going to talk about it, I don't know what Justin's got up his sleeve, but at some point we as a society just said, you know what? We've tried these pills on adults, so we're just going to start giving them to kids and see what happens to them. Is that how we're going to treat our most precious resource? I mean, more precious than oil, fresh air. I mean, it's our young people. And we're just going to hand them drugs. And if they don't work, we're going to give them something else. And they're going to be taking multiple drugs, all of which may or may not work, and then may make them suicidal on top of it.
Well, the issue is, right, I mean, how do we get here? We're seeing increases in young people being diagnosed with ADHD, young people being diagnosed with depression, young people being diagnosed with mood disorders. Why is this happening? And the reason it's happening, right, is because doctors are seeing a problem. They're trying to do something to take care of it. We have medications which have efficacy for adults. The only two, though, that are approved for adolescents, Prozac and Lexapro, right? Those are the only ones approved for depression in adolescents. Yet frequently, they're prescribed options other than those. And it's because the doctor, right, has decided, it's that whole thing about the black box warning of, well, why would I take this if I'm suicidal, but I'm going to take this thing that could make me suicidal? That seems counterproductive. It's the rewards are judged, right, in there. That's an important word, to outweigh the potential side effects and consequences. However, and I think this is a huge thing that we have to keep in mind, most of, the best results that we see in adults when using these drugs is in combination with therapy. Not, here's this drug cocktail, right? And you'll be fine.
But we did a show a month or two ago, right, about the lack of therapists, the availability.
If you can find a therapist,
right? Because
you hear that, folks? The vast majority of all antidepressants are prescribed by who, Lance?
Well, we learned they're prescribed by their pediatrician.
Their primary care,
their
right?
Primary care person.
Which
in young people is probably a pediatrician.
Right. Not a mental health professional.
Right.
And not that your primary care isn't, competent, but again, we talked a lot about in that episode, and if you haven't listened to it, you need to go back. Very important to understand, the training they receive in mental health care is limited, because that's not their area of specialty.
Right. It's one of the things they study,
right?
Because they're a general practitioner. So as a general practitioner, you have to know a little bit about a lot of things. You're not specializing in any one area.
So here's what I want people to think about And to throw in one more item to make people petulant. A nationwide study published in 2006 examined records of visits to doctors' offices by people younger than 20 and found a sharp rise in office visits involving the prescription of antipsychotic drugs to 1.2 million in 2002 from 200,000 in 1993. The drugs increasingly were prescribed in combinations, particularly among low-income children. Between 2004 and 2008, a national study of children enrolled in Medicaid found that 85% of patients on an antipsychotic drug were also prescribed a second medication, with the highest rates among disabled youngsters and those in foster care.
We got to get to the next. I can't even.
So the ones that we're most drugging up are the ones that are in the system.
Well, because they're, quote, in some people's minds, causing the most issues. So what are we going to do with it? We're going to give them drugs. But then we're going to send them the message that, well, you can't take illegal drugs. But we're going to give you all these prescription drugs to make you fit into society better. Come on, folks. If the warning bells aren't going off here, if you don't know where your friendly redneck liberal is going in the next segment, then you're not a long-time listener to the show, because this is just wrong. Just wrong.
We're going to talk about the medication cascade and what the other issues with prescribing multiple medications might be, not just to young people, but in general. Keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back. What to do when your child is prescribed multiple medications? Some might say don't give them to them. What is the evidence that it works? Well, here's part of the problem, Lance. While many of these drugs have they all, right, if they're an FDA-approved medication, they have studies behind them, and we know that they have some degree of efficacy and that generally speaking, that the benefits outweigh the side effects. However, two big caveats. The one that we talked about in the first segment, right, is that these are not always, in fact, there are only two medications, right, that are approved for depression in young people. So often, we don't know a lot about how these medications particularly interact with adolescents. Second big thing, when prescribed in combination, there is a somewhat startling lack of available research to indicate how they may interact with one another. And that's not just in adolescence, by the way. That is an overall mental health challenge of people who need more than one psychiatric medication, or that there's not a lot of stuff for doctors. It's not that doctors are being evil, right? There's not really much for them to go look at and see.
No, they're being brought a patient who is exhibiting certain tendencies and certain behaviors, and they're being brought to them by their parents or the system and being asked, what can we do for them? And the doctors are doing their best to try to help these young people. And as I said in the first segment, these young people need help. They're crying out for help. They're seeking help. But it sounds like there's so many maybe that are seeking help and not enough time or doctors. So we're just pushing medicine.
I want to read something to you from the Ohio State University's School of Medicine. And they have a piece on the impact of social media on attention span of students. It is clear that social media is making a huge impact on society. It is impossible to ignore. It impacts everyone, whether they have social media or not. I think that's a big point right there. The impacts intercede into every aspect of life in more than one way. By the way, that the attention span of society has exponentially decreased is relevant to all people. As educators, it is visible that not only are students distracted by social media during class, but when the distraction is removed, attention is extremely difficult to gain and retain. This is greatly diminishing the effectiveness of a valuable and retainable education. And then they go on to list multiple sources that cite the detriments that social media is causing to attention spans, and that taking the information into consideration and applying it to the average student, it will make the effects rather clear. And then that leads us to the 8-second attention span, which is an opinion piece in the New York Times.
8 second. You told me last year was 15 seconds. It's dropped in half. I mean, 15 seconds is abhorrible.
Yeah.
But it's dropped to 8?
Well, it depends on the age group that you're talking about. And, we're talking averages and that kind of stuff. So,
well, I mean, I watched it today, right? One of my students at the youth center was watching videos, and I said, hey, when you finish that video, get started on your work. 10 seconds later, they turned their phone off. And I said you could finish the video. Oh, they're all short videos. I've seen 10 videos in the last 5 minutes. And I'm like, what? I mean, because if I'm watching a video, that's 15, 20 minutes, right? I mean, I'm trying to learn something. But these kids today, and this is one of my students, one of my more attentive students, but yet one of the issues we've dealt with them over the last 6 months is their ability to, stay focused.
So CBS News tells us, and here's where part of the challenge comes in, right? We all know how addicting scrolling on our smartphones can be. And for kids and teens, all that screen time and all that attention are taking away from face-to-face interactions. Pediatric psychologists say there is currently, and this is the big problem, no concrete evidence indicating that regularly scrolling through videos on social media can impact a child's attention span, listen to this, long term. However, in the short term, it may make it harder for them to concentrate in class or complete an assignment, which they find to be boring. So what can you do? Well, according to the Cleveland Clinic, limiting access is certainly the only way that we know of. All the conversations and lecturing of a child is not going to do a thing because the captivation of screens is far more powerful than anything that you can say. According to the American Academy of Pediatrics, kids under 4 should have no more than 1 hour of screen time a day, while older kids should have no more than 2 hours of screen time a day. If your child is throwing tantrums when you take away their phone or tablet, it could be worth it to consult with a professional, according to experts.
Why? So they can be given pills? Just take the device away, hide it somewhere, and kick them out the front door and tell them to go play for an hour.
Lance's petulance
I don't know.
is
you're going to win just describing me, but that's
arriving
okay.
at the, well, you chose the word. It was fitting though.
But
it's just fitting. Here's the point of this, right? That I think is so important to make to people. We don't have the adequate research. So what I'm talking to you about right now is anecdotal. What I observe in the young people that we're working with, right, is that, and young people have always had a hard time focusing. Okay. Like, let's just,
right.
We're not saying
this isn't a new thing.
Right. We're not saying that, young people today seem to have a harder time focusing. And if you think about it on a basic level, right, non-professional, this isn't medical advice. It's just simple observation. If anybody, not just a child, but a child has a developing brain, right, where you, me, and many of our listeners, supposedly, right, our brains are done with their physical development. I mean, you can still learn and grow and all that, but your brain's no longer forming into whatever, it was going to become by the time you were 25. So the point there is that they're in this formational stage. And I think about frequently, Lance, I have time limits set on my phone to prevent me from using certain social media too long, because I know that if I don't do that, it is very difficult to keep track of time. One of the reasons, and we do have evidence, to support that, is the way that a lot of us it's like the way we perceive everything, right? It's based on what? Our experiences. If everything that you're consuming or everything that you're doing are very short little snippet things, think of just a to-do list. Forget digital media, right? It's like, okay, well, I need to throw this paper towel away. I need to sharpen this pencil. I need to grab a paperclip. You are going to not feel like, even if you put 100 of those things on the list, as you go through and check them off, it's going to feel like not a very long amount of time, right? Because none of these tasks are very hard. They're all very fast. So yeah, there's a lot of tasks, but I'm probably doing them very quickly, right? Now think about if we transition that into the digital landscape, and in front of me are short form videos, right? Many of which may be 30 seconds, a minute, a couple minutes, not very long. And if I get bored with it, I swipe and I get a new one. Or when it's done, it automatically moves on to the next one. And all I got to do is swipe, right? Very much like that list. There is a satisfaction that you get. If I don't like it, I'm on to the next thing. And if I like it, I can watch it and then it moves on for me. And I think that the thing to get there is not just with kids, but with adults too. We lose perception of how much time we give to something because none of the individual pieces are a great amount of time. So and remember, social media companies know this, right? It's the whole reason that websites, and you may have noticed this as you've been on websites lately, especially news sites, they've introduced what's called infinite scroll or some version of it, right? Which is where when you scroll on a page, you cannot get to the bottom of the page. If you're old enough and you remember, way back in the day when the internet first dawned, it used to be common that you would have to go through several pages of an article, right? Like you get to the end, go to the next page, go to the next page. What they found is that we can keep people here longer if we remove the need to do that and simply all they have to do is scroll. All they have to do is scroll, right? Because you're never leaving where you're at. You're just simply scrolling on. And I know these seem like small things, and I'm sorry because people are probably like, what? Are you crazy? But this is, folks, there's a reason these are billion-dollar companies, right? And it's because they study this crap, and they know what hooks us, and they know how to hack your brain. And it's not that they're trying to make money, right? That's what they're trying to do. And the longer you stay on, the more they make. Never mind the effects. Keep it here on The State of Us. We'll be right back. Can't say right now today that there are long-term effects to scrolling through endless videos on social media, but we do know that there can be short-term effects on your ability to focus or pay attention to things, especially things that you perceive as boring, right? Now, if you're young and you're learning the world, right, and you're developing your perspective and you grow up with this and this is part of your life, even if the effects are short term, which would probably be good news, right? Because that means if we remove this stuff within a certain amount of time, your attention span can actually improve. It's not a permanent, deficit. But just like with anything else, if you're on your phone every day and you're logging 4 or 5 or 6 or more hours of screen time, then those short-term effects never go away. Hence, they're long-term effects simply because you keep using the thing, right? That goes into you. Much like what we talk about with the drug Adderall, right? It doesn't really build, so to speak, in your system the way that some other drugs do. You have to take it, it's effective, and then it loses effectiveness, and then you have to take it again. However, if you're taking it every day, then that's kind of your new normal. Just like if you're consuming 5 or 6 hours of these videos a day, which we know have an impact on your attention span short term, then it always impacts your attention span because you're always consuming it. And again, I'm not able to quote from somewhere, Lance. To me, that seems like some basic duh, right? I mean, you have to remove part of the thing that I think is a huge contributor to the angst.
Well, and I agree. And you went way in depth, which is fine, but we're back to where I want to talk about this is that we're not doing children any favors. And we get into this society where they feel lost. They feel the anxiety. They feel lost, right? And I think sometimes we have to point to us because we'll take you to the doctor, we'll get you a pill, and then you'll feel better because I got to move on. I got my life to do. If you're rearing children, okay, if you've decided to have children or you decide to foster care, whatever, and you're bringing up children, guess what? To do it effectively, you have to give up some things from your life.
They have to be first.
And I don't see that because so many adults are searching, right? They're searching for the right job. They're searching for a better job. They're searching for the right partner. They're searching for, and when they're doing that, that's not bad, right? There's nothing wrong with that, except if you have children, I guess from the age of 2, they take up some of your time. They take up a lot of your time if you're doing the job correctly, okay? And I'm not saying that guarantees a good outcome. I know better than that. But it enhances the ability because by being there for them and being that rock, by acknowledging their fears and talking to them about what they're thinking about and saying, yes, I understand that that's real, but now look at this, and this, right? We've got some things that we can draw on. And by giving them those things, then maybe we can cut back on some of the medicine. But you can't do that if as the adult, you're saying, I don't have time for this because I've got 3 new job interviews and I'm working from home and I've got to get ready for that new friend that's coming over. And then children are left to their own device. And the biggest takeaway from what you said to me was their brains are still developing. Okay. We can't treat them like little adults. They're not little adults. And if you're a parent and you're getting mad at me because I'm describing you, I'm sorry. Okay. You have to give up things if you decide to bring children into the world and then take care of them. Your needs and desires become secondary to theirs. And if you're not willing to do that, then in my opinion, there's nothing wrong with that. Don't bring children into the world. They're not your friend. They're not your plaything. They are young people who need guidance, support, validation. And we as a society, in my opinion, are failing them in those ways. And now we've turned to, well, let's give them drugs and multiple drugs because none of us have the time to deal with their irrationalizations, their fears, and their anxiety. And that's what we need to be doing.
A survey of Canadian media consumption by Microsoft, ever heard of them, concluded that the average attention span had fallen to 8 seconds, down from 12 in the year 2000. We now have a shorter attention span than goldfish, the study revealed. Attention span was defined as the amount of concentrated time on a task without becoming distracted. Satya Nadella, the chief executive officer of Microsoft, said, quote, "The true scarce commodity of the near future will be human attention." So what do you do about all that, right? They're feeling angst. You're on this place where you're under constant scrutiny. It's making it hard to focus. You're struggling with an attention span. It's hard to get off of. They're being judged harshly by their peers. They feel the pressure. They're not feeling meaningful connection, right? All these many things that we've been able to talk about with social media. What do you do? And not just with social media, right? Because then that's also a lack of building social skills in the real world. There's a lot of different options. The one that they've found to be the most effective, and I think this is important, Lance mentioned it earlier in the show, the New York Times article we're referencing was very clear that most mental health professionals agree there is a place for medication. These wild cocktails is probably not the place. And especially wild cocktails without managed therapy by a mental health professional is definitely not the place. Mental health professionals are hard to find. And the single proven most effective version of therapy is dialectic behavior therapy, which is a subset of cognitive behavioral therapy. And ultimately what it does is it works to reframe a person's thoughts and behavior. It focuses initially on behavior and raw emotion, helping the individual surmount moments of crisis and understand what prompted their behavior in the first place. The fullest version of dialectic behavior therapy can take 6 months to a year to complete, and it has 4 components. The initial step, though, is one that we can all practice. The goal is to teach a patient to recognize the feelings in the body when dangerous impulses arise, like a lump in the throat, racing pulse, tense shoulders. That's according to a psychologist on Long Island. And in the late 1990s, that same psychologist was one of the ones who developed this therapy. Parents can learn to put those feelings into words, and that is vital. You have to acknowledge that what they're feeling is real, even if it's not logical. That's where I think a lot of people mess up, right? I'm dismissing because what I think you're feeling, and with my developed brain, isn't logical, then that's dumb and you shouldn't feel that. No.
It's the worst thing you can tell a teenager.
Why are you feeling that, right? Let's think through it. Let's look at it. Let's discuss it. And oh, by the way, right, all while having meaningful human interaction with somebody. It doesn't fix it all, right? Okay, as somebody, and I said this in the other episode, as somebody who has taken these medications, I appreciate that there are times where they are needed, okay? And I do think that there is a place and purpose for them. I think part of what we've tried to indicate today is that we often go too far. And we often have good intentioned people who it just kind of keeps going down the rabbit hole, right? And before you know it, it's like that endless scroll. Well, they were just on one medication 3 months ago. Now they're on 10. How'd that happen? Relative to how we track and perceive what's happening to us, right? Have to regularly take charge of your own health, your children's health, and ask for that reassessment of, do we need to be on all this? Does all of what we're taking make sense? You know, because there are times, and the article reveals that, Lance, where sometimes the combinations can make it worse. Because once you combine a certain number of them, the side effects mount, and then the side effects outweigh the benefits, which was the whole reason in the first place that you were trying to take them, was to get better, not to get worse.
Well, there's just a real quick saying, you can't always just treat the symptoms, you have to treat the cause. And that's what's going on. These young people that are on these multi-drug cocktails, as we call them, are there because they go in and they're showing this symptom. And then 2 weeks later, they're showing this symptom. And a month later, then they're showing a different symptom. And so they're given a different drug to treat each of those symptoms. And the time is not being taken to treat the cause.
And I think what speaks to that, Lance, is when you think about the way that it was the most clearly explained to me, is just take Prozac, because it's, we've talked about it a lot before. Obviously, it's kind of the darling child, right, of antidepressants. It is a great example of a drug that, what does it really do, right? Well, from what we understand about what it does, right, in very simplistic terms, is it addresses a symptom, right? And the symptom is, I'm feeling closed in. I'm feeling hopeless, right? I'm feeling fatigue. I'm feeling a lack of energy, right? These are things I'm feeling. So what does this do? Well, what it does is it seeks to address that by basically changing the amount of chemicals that are present in your body, right? Naturally occurring chemicals that you would have regardless. It tries to increase those so that you feel, there's the key, right, better. Nothing wrong with that. However, why is it that what we do is we say, well, we're going to prescribe this, and often it's, this is the effective regimen. You're going to be on this for 6 months, and then we're going to start to taper you off if we do it, the way that a lot of mental health professionals say it should be done. Well, why is that? Well, the reason some people get better, even if they don't have therapy, is because what caused, here we are again, the depression in the first place. Well, there was probably something in life, right? You were stressed. You were under a lot of pressure. You were being bullied. All legitimate reasons that you might become depressed. So what they do is they treat the symptom. They make you feel better until whatever that thing is has been removed from your life. Then you're weaned off. And amazingly, now you're okay. The point is, the drugs really they're not even designed. That's not, their purpose is not to, fix these things. It is to say, you have to feel better to get better. Okay. And that, to me, that cemented it to me when somebody explained it to me that way. I can't take credit for coming up with that. I think that is so important because we don't think about it that way. We'll take this and you'll be better. No, you take this so that you can feel better, so that you can get better. But getting better is hard work, examining your behavior, having those human connections and interactions, and changing, right, the way that you're operating in the world. And that doesn't just happen by taking a pill. The pill is very valuable because it can make you feel better and it can get you through difficult times.
It allows you to start doing the work that you need to do.
And sometimes that's enough, right? Because if the thing in your life isn't really that big a deal or it's an isolated incident, the pill may truly be enough because it's not a sustained long-term issue. There's this thing in life and it, was really difficult and I needed assistance getting through it. Okay. And then you're done. But the data tells us that that's not how these are being used most of the time, right? That is not how they're being used most of the time. And I think that tells you in and of itself the issue. Why do we talk about this today, Lance?
Well, because True Chat has a mission.
Not just to make people petulant, right?
True Chat has a mission, and the mission is to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations. And if you enjoyed today's show and it made you think a little bit, which I hope it did, and you have conversations with others and they say, where'd you hear this? Tell them. The State of Us can be found on Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, Apple Podcast, and everywhere podcasts are found.
The State of Us is releasing new episodes on Tuesdays and Thursdays as a podcast, first thing in the mornings. Those same episodes can be heard on AM and FM radio stations across the United States. For The State of Us, who takes the win today, Lance?
Well, you used it more, but you only used it to describe me. So I think
we try to pull a technicality.
I think
so. It sounds like.
But by pure usage, it was you, but you only used it to describe me. So I was an important part of your victory today.
For The State of Us, I'm Justin T. Weller.
I'm Lance Jackson.
Special thanks to producer Bradley Butch. Thank you all, our audience, for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Be the change. Be sure to check out our website, thestateofus.org, for books, articles, and all the ways to tune in. thestateofus.org.